Zachodźże słoneczko, skoro masz zachodzić. Po nas nogi bolą, po tym polu chodzić. Po nas nogi bolą, po tym polu chodzić. Nogi bolą chodzić, ręce bolą robić. Zachodźże słoneczko, skoro masz zachodzić. Zachodźże słoneczko, skoro masz zachodzić. Za las słonko, za las. Nie wyglądaj na nas. Wrócisz do nas jutro, jak będzie raniutko. Wrócisz do nas jutro, jak będzie raniutko.
At the very beginning of the war, my parents were taken out of Poland. They were told to leave their houses, and they were taken by cattle truck, if you like, or trains, as it was then, cattle trains, to Siberia. They took a journey that many Poles took at the beginning of the war when they were taken out of their houses and when they were told to leave their houses. My dad traveling from Lvov, which is now in the Ukraine, and my mum from Vilno, which is now part of Lithuania. And they were taken east into Russia, into Siberia, and eventually found their way down south through Tehran, Iran, down that way, down to Persia. My mum found herself in Africa with her family, and my dad found himself in India. Along the way, my dad, with his family, my dad was orphaned during the war, and he then traveled to an orphanage that took him and a huge amount of children, along with his sister, to India. And he was settled there in the Maharaja's palace, Jamnakar. He settled into Maharaja's palace, which was then given over to orphans from the war. And he spent something like 5 to 6 years there before he then, actually about 5 years before he then traveled with his sister by boat all the way down south, as you can imagine, all the way around to England in about 1945. My mother, on the other hand, who was about 3 years younger than my dad, so she was about 3 when she was evacuated, when they were torn from their homes, and she found herself with her family in Africa. My mum's family settled in Birmingham, so we would have been in the Midlands there somewhere. The Polish communities then started to create where young people would come together, and they were educated in Polish because they were thinking that the Poles would end up returning to Poland. But when Poland became a communist country, there was no possibility for them to return, or the decision was made for them that they wouldn't return, or perhaps they made the decision not to return. I don't think it would have been easy. And they settled in England. My parents would meet when those communities got together, and my dad remembered seeing my mum for the first time when her school was doing a gymnastics display in one of these community meetings outdoors, and she had a ball, and they were doing, if you think back to the 1950s and the sort of gymnastics displays that young people would do then as part of their school PE curriculum. My mum had a ball and she'd be throwing it, and the girls would be catching it, and they'd be doing it in unison, and my mum dropped the ball.
Jeden mówi tyś moja, drugi mówi jak Bóg da, a trzeci mówi moja najmilejsza, czemu żeś mi tak smutna? A trzeci mówi moja najmilejsza, czemu żeś mi tak smutna? La 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 la.
Eventually, when they finished their studies and they both qualified as teachers, they traveled to London because they wanted to, I think like many people then would want to make their own lives away from their parents, perhaps then at the time. And they traveled to London where the possibilities were huge. And that's how they met, in the community schools that the Poles had created in the Midlands. My parents came to London and they settled. So this would have been after their wedding fair. And eventually, as time passed and they carried on working, they worked very hard. My parents would always say that they were very keen non-smokers. They didn't drink, they didn't smoke, they didn't go out. They saved all their money as teachers, didn't go on expensive holidays, and saved their money, and eventually bought a house in a place called Abbeywood, which is opposite a beautiful park, Lesness Abbey, Lesness Park. And it was a house that a large Victorian semi, which I don't mind telling you, at the time they paid £4,000 for, if you can imagine that. A house that they had all their lives. And in fact, it's still our family home in many ways. We still have access to it, and some of the their granddaughters are living there now. So it's we have very fond memories of Abbeywood, a huge house that was the scene of many parties and many family events, like many people have. But certainly we didn't move around. So we were all born there. I was even born in the living room. So for me, especially sort of sentimental and special place for me. So Southeast London in Abbeywood is where they eventually settled and lived their whole lives. We attended church every Sunday. We went to Polish school on Saturdays. All of these things we did without question. And of course, my mum, well, she was a dancer anyway, so she would teach her 3 children, to dance. My mum had been involved with the Polish school. Now, this was the one in Brockley at the time. And because she was a teacher and because she taught dance, it must have been then Ksiądz Wróbel. And I think then Ksiądz Dębski had been talking to my mum about pulling a group of people together to perhaps sing and dance. And we would do a little bit of dancing and a little bit of singing. And as we started to do more and more, and we started to be representative of our community, we took more and more songs from the repertoire of Mazowsze and Śląsk. Now, Mazowsze and Śląsk are 2 state dance companies that exist in Polska, in Poland right now. And certainly their music, we were brought up on their music, or we would listen to it quite a lot. It wasn't until we happened upon a song, Karolinka, Poszła Karolinka do Gogolina. It wasn't until we sung that song that it became something of a sort of a theme tune for us. So we became Karolinka, and this became part of our, it was very significant, demonstrative of who we were and what we looked like and what we presented. And we started singing, dancing more and more. And we do a number of events, where there'll be VIPs, we'd be representing Polskość, everything to do with Polishness, everything to do with culture, with tradition. And we would take part in these special events, meet dignitaries, mayors, cardinals. We sang for the Pope, for example, when he came over in the 1980s, we went to Crystal Palace. And the group started to really grow. It started to really grow. Why? Because actually it became very active, and lots of young people were pulled together to sing and dance, not always just because they wanted to, but because my mum started to pull people in. We were making costumes, we were inviting dance instructors over, we were creating new pieces of work, and the singing and dancing in our company was vying for time, actually, I would say. Lots of us wanted to dance, lots of us wanted to sing, and it was always, we never had enough time to do what we needed to do, especially since we were performing, I would say, a couple of times a month in different places. Places like Balham, White Eagle Club, places like POS at the time, places like Ognisko in Kensington. I remember when my mum died and I wanted Karolinka to sing at the funeral. And I remember listening to everyone singing a song, and it was really moving for me. It was in rehearsal in this dingy South Norwood parafialna sala, and they were singing this beautiful hymn that they were going to sing when the coffin was going to be carried out of the church. And I remember thinking then, we wouldn't be here doing this if Mama hadn't done this group, if she hadn't created this, and this is where it's come to, that even when you're dying, or even when you've died, and even at your funeral, and even at the crematorium, Karolinka's in singing, in costume, people are representing, people are remembering.